Success isn't having trophies or toys. It isn't a medal or friends of your choice. What is success that's easy to see? It's trying to be the best that you can be. Don't worry what others might have or might say. When trying your best, success comes your way.
Welcome, and thank you so much. You are the CEO of the John Wooden course and the president of Guerin Marketing Services, whose mission it is to help clients and organizations become their greatest self in this life. And I really enjoyed the book you wrote, Coach Them Way Up. There were a lot of wonderful tidbits in that book. And I particularly liked your personal journey because it seems like you, like so many of us, are searching. At some point, we get to this phase in our life where we're searching for purpose and meaning and happiness in our life. And you've worked for a lot of blue chip companies, such as GM and General Electric under Jack Welch, where the measure of success was based on short-term targets, particularly short-term profitability, short-term financial targets. You said in the book that it didn't sit well with you, but you couldn't articulate it until you met Coach, who changed that measure of success for you. I'd love it if you can expand on that to begin with.
Yeah, I think we're all, we're all on that journey trying to find success in our life and trying to find significance in our life. And a lot of that early searching has a lot to do with our background and how we grow up and who influences. If you grow up in a household of very successful parents, then you may have a pretty clear blueprint for what you think some definition of success looks like. But I grew up in a home where my father, left our family at 3. My mom was on welfare, no education. We never had a college graduate in the family. Wasn't sure, where the meals were coming from week to week, things like that. And mom did everything. Hardworking, loyal, loving, honest woman that just did everything she possibly could, to keep her kids fed. So, kind of a soft spot there for me on that. And so that idea of trying to find, a path that you might be able to be something. As a 4th grader, I had a teacher who just kind of created a spark. We had an athlete in the little hometown that I grew up where I grew up, who turned out to be a professional athlete that went on to play for the Boston Celtics. And he was my first early hero. So when he was a high school senior, I was a 10-year-old, and I was watching this amazing athlete perform. And every day I'd go back to class during basketball season and be really excited with my 4th grade teacher about the things that I saw and what I thought that meant. And I guess she saw a spark. And so she started to try to light that fire a little bit. And probably if I hadn't had teachers and coaches, I think I probably would have ended up, I grew up close to Mansfield, Ohio, which is where the prison is, where they filmed the Shawshank Redemption, if you've ever seen that movie. And my grandma used to drive me past there about once a month, just to remind me what that worst case scenario looked like if I didn't, behave myself and try to grow up to be a good kid. And so, between coaches and teachers and growing up in a sports crazy small town, I still love that small town. 50 years later, I'm still following a young man from our hometown that might be a Charles Woodson. He very well could be a Heisman Trophy candidate next year. He's a quarterback at the University of Virginia. Same small set of circumstances. So, those influences are so critical. And, I luckily got to college on a football scholarship, got a chance to play a few years, got a bachelor's and master's degree at Western Michigan University, and, went off to the business world and ran into the Jack Welches of the world and tried to figure out, what coaching and success and leadership. And then I got a chance to work for a really good company called the Sandy Corporation that was in the consulting, training, and performance improvement business. And I think they helped give me a mindset of this idea of what's possible and the potential that people and organizations have. And it really, sparked a level of intellectual curiosity to kind of put me on that path. Well, how do you help people, and how do you get them from where they'd like to be to where they'd like to go, and how do you help make companies better? And there's a big world out there. And then, as fate would have it, I ran into the amazing John Wooden as part of that consulting process when we were helping to launch the University of Toyota. And that was a company at that time that was reinventing quality in America, and certainly in the car business. And Coach Wooden and the quality principles at Toyota kind of came together in a really powerful way, and started me to think about, geez, I've never heard information like this. And I've listened to some pretty intelligent people, but man, this John Wooden guy is something. Where does that wisdom come from? Where does he get the grace? Where's the humility, the strength? How did he accomplish everything he did and still be this quiet, loving, humble, great listening, intense kind of person that you just, when you spent time with him, it was almost spiritual. And when you walked away from Coach's humble little condo, I usually was close to tears, and dozens and dozens of times, and always with the same impression. Man, I got to be a better man. I got to be a better man. So this 25-year journey is really about trying to pay attention to the things Coach teaches and apply them to my own life and children and fathers and marriage and all of the things that our family failed at so early in my life. And oh, by the way, might there be a chance to help others, which Coach says is what really matters. The ability to help and serve others is really where you're going to find the real joy and purpose in your life.
And he, of course, took that definition of success and turned it upside down. So he said success is, and obviously he has that definition, which is the top of the pyramid. But in essence, it is doing the best you can, however capable you are. And it's not about winning at all costs, which is...
It may not be winning at any cost.
Yes.
Yeah. I think the power of its definition is really a life changer.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that our company, are not companies, but companies and our cultures and our families are really struggling with. I mean, we have half our world just fighting to survive, and another large portion fighting each other to be rich and prominent and successful and all of those. And so we're battling on every front, and we're not trusting anybody. And, it's all about our swag and our brag and our image. And all of those things are all caught up in this very process that John Wooden considered when he wrote his own definition of success. And when he spent a couple of years writing literally this paragraph that became his definition of success, and ended up with just 4 key ideas to do with peace of mind. Wow. I mean, you can latch onto that one for quite a while, because if we ask ourselves, where is the peace today? Any individual say, geez, are you at peace in your life? Are you at peace with yourself? Are you at peace with your family? Are you at peace with the people that you work with every day? I think the Bible, I think there's a phrase that says, peace, peace, there is no peace. But it also says that there is a peace that surpasses all understanding. That's the peace that John Wooden had. And that was part of what, oh my goodness, how do you get to that point? And then the idea of self-satisfaction, that ultimately it doesn't matter, what the world says you did or you accomplished. We've seen some pretty successful people literally take their own lives when the applause stopped, right? Yeah. Because they hadn't found success inside themselves. And it's self-satisfaction based on what? I gave my best effort and I did everything I was capable of doing. And that Coach says that's got to be enough. But also that's something you can control.
Yes.
And all these other definitions of success in our world, we have no control over. I can be a billionaire one day, the stock market turns upside down, and I'm on welfare. Maybe not that drastic, but those are possibilities. Millions come and go, as you know, in pretty early career, pretty quickly. So he really had a handle You know, when I think about a little poem that he carried around in his pocket, four things a man must surely do if he would make his life more true: to think without confusion
Yeah.
clearly, to love his fellow man sincerely, to act from honest motives purely, and to trust in God and heaven securely. Sounds like a simple little poem, but it was four principles that he used to help guide his entire life and many of the decisions he made in life.
Yes. There's so many beautiful things you brought up, particularly that he had so much grace and he was really almost spiritual in a sense. You know, so many of us were not around or were very young when he was at his prime, even into his elder years. He passed in 2010. Many of the younger generation didn't even get a chance to see him on television, to hear him on radio. You did. What was it like to be in the presence of this man? I would love to hear just from your words how you felt when he was speaking. What was he like when he was in the presence of his youngsters or other coaches that were learning from him?
Well, it's interesting. I think one of the things that immediately comes to mind that he was the same man in every circumstance. Whether he was, I remember being in his condo one afternoon, and the phone rang, and it was a really interesting process because he never had a secretary. He had a little recording device, a little answering machine, and when his phone would ring, he would never pick it up. He would listen to the message, see who it is, and then make a decision to pick it up or not pick it up. And I've been in this was place many times when you had no idea who might be on the other line. Prominent coaches, politicians. The time I'm thinking about then was the White House was calling, and the president wanted an opportunity to meet with Coach and was going to be in town and was trying to arrange that. But as it turned out, the time that he was going to be there, Coach had already scheduled that time for a young basketball coach who was traveling in from Indiana, and he did not cancel that appointment to meet with the president who wanted to meet with him because he had already committed to that young person on his calendar. I mean, that's the integrity. You know, he was to some degree, he was a respecter of people, but not necessarily, caught up in any way to the idea of a position of a person. He was he was as kind and generous and loving and listening and loyal to any person he met. People would come up to him when we would travel, and he was always gracious and a great listener. And when you were in his presence, you felt there was nothing else going on in this world but you. He just was an incredible listener and riveted his attention on what you had to say, seemed very interested. So he had this respect, and he gave respect by basically giving time and attention and focus to every single person that he met.
Yes. You know, you touched on this a little bit earlier, this idea of journey versus outcome and how we are so focused and Coach talked about it as FFPP. I remember it this way. Fortune, fame, power, prestige is what we crave in in the world today. And that is to the detriment of enjoyment of the journey. And what was so profound to me when reading your book is that it took him 14 years to put together the pyramid. And like you said, 2 years to just come up with a definition of success. It seems like in our world, we want everything done in 3 months, in a week, in 6 months. And that really changed my perspective on the patience that is required to truly get to a spot of self-success. It takes a long time to learn. And I learned that through reading about this journey. He started at 22 writing these things down, and I think it was 34 when he finally got to the position of saying, I think I've finally got something that I can share, that I can embody, that I can articulate and teach.
Yeah, I'd like to when we share that, and I'm so happy that you caught that. because I think that the pyramid of success might be the best kept secret in the history of American culture, and the most important idea that has not become prominent and in the center of how we think about who we are as a nation. It's a blueprint for our schools. It's a blueprint for our families. And here's I'd like to say, challenge people to think about when you think about the pyramid. Take the best idea that you've ever had in your life. And I want you to think about this idea and think that this idea is going to last 100 years, maybe 200, maybe 500 years. Okay. And oh, by the way, you're going to work on this idea for the next 14 years.
Right.
Okay. And then, oh, by the way, you're going to be able to write this idea down on one page. And you're going to be able to come up with a single framework diagram that helps illustrate this 14 years of wisdom and thinking. Can you think of too many other ideas out there that you can describe with sort of that sense of incredible power and purpose? And I've been studying it now for over 25 years, and it's a PhD course in human behavior and human psychology. And ironically, that started at in 1932, his former coach at Purdue, Piggy Lambert, wrote a book, one of the first, I think, in sports, called Practical Basketball. Yeah. And in that book, there was actually a chapter that spoke to how important it was to understand the psychology of your players. So somehow that planted a seed that got him on a track to begin thinking about human behavior. And I guess it would have been in the late 1960s, Coach Wooden wrote the next version of that called Practical Modern Basketball. And in the first chapter of that, he really defined some of these very key principles that we've captured now in a 5-part coaching model that kind of represents the blueprint for our book. And that thinking around behavior and the pyramid was very much in the part of that. Coach Wooden would say that he wasn't really an original thinker, interestingly, but that was part of his humility. He'd say everything we learn from somebody else. And that's why it's so important for us to have mentors and coaches and teachers. And oh, by the way, pay attention to what they tell us and use what we're learning. I mean, often we get an awful lot of good advice. Oh, that was an epiphany, but then we never do anything with it. Oh, that wasn't Coach Wooden. He did something with everything he ever learned that was of value. He also had, I thought, pretty close to a photographic memory, and he not only used it, he remembered it all. Whether it was, poetry from Byron and Shelley and Keats or the hundreds of poems he'd written himself. I mean, the capability and capacity of his mind and his intellectual curiosity was just staggering.
Yes, he was obviously an incredibly intelligent human. And I think a lot of it came across because he was incredibly disciplined mentally and physically. I think I read somewhere that he, like clockwork, every lunch break, he walked. Was it a mile or 5 miles? I can't remember.
5 miles.
5
Yeah.
miles. I told my husband that. He said that you can't be talking about 5. It's got to be 1. And I'm like,
No, it was 5, and he tried it. The discipline also connected to, I think he gave himself an hour to do it. So he was trying to walk at a 10 to 12 minute, and that's a very brisk pace. And this was a man who he was doing it in his last year when he was 65. Oh, by the way, he was doing it for the next number of years that he visited his office in retirement. He still went out and had his physical routine. But he was, that routine wasn't just physical. It was mental, it was emotional, and it was moral. I think he had a disciplined process to guard his mind, to guard his heart. And that's why, it's such a challenge today. And I've said, I'm the last guy on the planet that ought to be teaching this stuff. It's sort of like, I guess if you want to learn not to drink, you probably ought to find a recovered alcoholic, because he's the guy that likely, might be able to help. So all of these challenges of being a better person and a more moral person and taking the higher ground, that life and God's teachings has to offer. It's the challenge of a lifetime for all of us. But Coach had, and you asked that question about, many of his personal approaches and what his routines were every day. Well, he prayed every day. He read his Bible every day. He read the sports page every day. He listened to the news every day, a little bit. With him, everything was everything in moderation. He wasn't excessive in any part of his life. He planned every day. He was a man, he had a phrase that make each day your masterpiece.
Yes.
That was more than a phrase. That was an organizational principle as well. He went to school to be an engineer, interestingly, but wasn't able to complete engineering at Purdue because he couldn't he couldn't go to school in the summer and do the summer program, so he had to drop out. That's how he ended up in English and coaching and teaching. But he really had an engineer's mind. So he engineered every 24 hours about as well as you possibly could. It was one of his geniuses as a practice coach. The 2-hour period that he took, he literally organized down to the minute for 50 years. And he had notes and books on every practice he ever ran in all the schools. I mean, he could go back 15 years and tell you what he did on this day. And oh, by the way, he kept a little card that day to tell him what he wanted to improve the next day. So he had a mental discipline that was just incredible. His definition of industriousness on the pyramid is hard work and careful planning.
Yes.
Right. And that was very much a part of that careful planning was very much a part of his routine. Took 2 hours every day to plan a 2-hour practice with his coaches. So didn't want to waste a minute, because he also didn't want to practice too long. It was part of his personal discipline. At a certain period of time, he wanted to be home to have dinner with the family, and he did nearly every night, because he also wanted to surround his life with love and balance.
Yes.
So it all tied together beautifully.
Yes. What a great factoid about him wanting to be an engineer, because that really does show the precision of how he lived his life, his daily life.
Pooja, I like to share when he said he wanted to build roads and bridges. That was his goal as an engineer. And I like to say, ironically, I believe that's what he did his whole life.
Yeah.
I believe he built roads of performance to get his teams and people, and we talk about the John Wooden Way. I believe that's a road that he's created now that'll last for a long, long time. I believe he built bridges that helped people get from where they were to where they needed to be. And he had this incredible capability to see the bridge in its final form. He had the ability to break the bridge down into its smallest parts, construct it, engineer it, build it, and then, oh, by the way, he had the ability to lead people across it. That was an incredible sense of capabilities for an engineer and a leader and a coach. And so I think God blessed him with, some incredible abilities and faculties, but he turned out, I believe, to be an engineer. He described himself as just a teacher, but he sure did an awful lot of engineering in his lifetime.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. The other thing that really hit me in reading about him and your book is that, first of all, have a life philosophy. Just that idea of having a life philosophy, I think, is fundamental to so many people, but evades so many people, even until their very last day. But he went one step further. He said, write it down. Have the philosophy and write it down. And I think that really struck me. And I want to read you this quote by Pete Carroll, the head coach over the Seattle Seahawks, because when he was in transition from his coaching jobs, he picked up a book about John Wooden to get some of the wisdom that we're all seeking. And he said, something I read just hit me right between the eyes. I slammed the book shut and knew the solution. And what he was saying there is that he didn't have this one sentence, this one philosophical truth about his life that he could share with other people, that he can embody, that he can articulate. It was missing. And that was the thread that was missing and enabled him to now become the person he is. So this idea of being able to reflect enough, and it can take years but to find your life philosophy that is your truth and then be able to write it down. I found that incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think we're in the coaching world. I think coaches are more likely to do it. And this is was certainly true with Peter. Are more likely to do it, define their coaching philosophy. But we like to think about, and a part of what we share in the book is this idea that you've got to be first a coach of yourself.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do with the book is basically promote everybody to the idea of being head coach of their own life. Now, they may be co-head coach depending on the quality of their marriage and how their marriage works and who their partner is and all those kinds of things. But the idea of being a head coach of your own life is a pretty important idea. And in the family construct, the idea of being coach mom and coach dad and somehow being coaching in the family in a way that you ultimately create the strongest team to be your home team, right? Your own home team, how to be the strongest team that you're working with. And so many of these principles are not as applicable, but more applicable to the challenge we have of coaching. Coach Wooden would say that teaching and parenting are the most important jobs in the world. And obviously he equated teaching and coaching. He saw those kind of pretty much as one thing. So trying to develop that, philosophy for what your home team ought to be all about. And, again, so much of I think about this idea of, earlier on that you were talking about in terms of this, and again, gets back to the definition of success. Is it Webster's definition? Right. The accumulation of material possessions or the attainment of a position of power or prestige. And for most of the world, it still seems to be that. We call that the American dream, right? People are beating down our borders, are killing people to get in, to be able to do those kinds of things. But yet somehow it turns out not to be everything we hoped it would be. Yeah. In Coach's book for children, he wrote a great little book called Inch and Miles, The Journey to Success. And it teaches the pyramid of success to children. And he's got a definition of success in there that says success is happiness in your heart, knowing you did your best. Man, that's a great place to start your kids. And then he's got a little poem for them. It goes something like this. Success isn't having trophies or toys. It isn't a medal or friends of your choice. What is success that's easy to see? It's trying to be the best that you can be. Don't worry what others might have or might say. When trying your best, success comes your way. Now, he wrote that poem for children, but I'm not so sure it's not for every adult. I know an awful lot of people that are spending their whole life chasing trophies and toys as their ultimate definition of success. So, if we can get our children onto some of these ideas of another view of success, I think we can transform their lives and our culture along with it.
Indeed. Your wisdom is beautiful. I want to touch on one last thing and then get into the John Wooden course. We talked a little bit about having a life philosophy. We talked about writing it down. The third thing is, and you brought this up earlier, is practicing it daily. And this is why, and here's another great anecdote. When he met Mike Singletary, the other coach, he gave him the 7-point creed on a card and he put it in his pocket. And this idea of, wonderful, beautiful. And to me, the beauty is not just writing it down, but being able to look at it and practice it every single day. And I think that is another point that so many of us are missing, is that daily practice, that daily internalization of all of this wisdom.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's not just a rumor. John Wooden literally looked at the 7-point creed every day of his life for 80 years. Wow. Literally. And he got it from his father. He got it when he graduated from grade school, and it became, 7 life principles. I mean, just the idea that an uneducated father, a brilliant man who wasn't formally educated, took the time to write these things down, and you and I are talking about them 100 years later. And that fact that Coach Wooden lived his life after these 7 principles, and these principles were so important to him because of the wisdom that they employed, because of the way that he saw how they continued to shape his life in a positive way, and the fact that they had come from his father.
Yes.
And, when Keith Erickson, one of his great players, stood up at Coach Wooden's funeral or at his memorial service, and obviously had thought long and hard about what's the most wonderful thing I could say about my coach, he knew somehow it was connected to his dad.
Yeah.
And he used the words, and he was thinking and talking about the 7-point creed when he shared the words that, Coach, your dad would be very proud of the man that you've become.
Yes, I read that as well.
Yeah. So literally every day of his life, and we've shared, we've now built a couple of versions of these little wallet cards, and Coach was really happy with, we took his father gave him a little piece of paper with things written down, and then we've turned them into cards. And there's a lot of these little cards that have been, I've seen them on ESPN dozens of times, and people pull them out of their pocket. It's just a little thing, but it's got the pyramid on it, and it's got, be true to yourself, help others, make each day your masterpiece, drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible, make friendship a fine art, build a shelter against a rainy day, and pray for guidance, and count and give your blessings. Count your blessings every single day. And that literally is the way the man tried to live his life. And it's sort of this idea, he was so more concerned about the standards by which he would live than pursuing any kind of standard of living.
Wow.
And I think that's the opportunity. If we get our standards, and it's interesting, that's also connected to his view of winning. He never mentioned winning. He also never mentioned losing. He just did all the things it took to be a winner. He was a tremendous competitor, loved to win at anything. I mean, his friends would say, Coach Wooden didn't like to lose at anything. He was playing pool, playing golf, playing cards, whatever. John Wooden liked to win, make no mistake about it. But he never mentioned it. Never had a player, and I've interviewed many of his players all the way back to South Bend Central who said they never heard John Wooden use the word win. He had a standard, Pooja, that was higher than winning. And that standard ultimately produced the winning that he was able to accomplish. And we can do that in our life, right? When we get those standards right, we'll create the kind of winning and positivity and success in our life that we're looking for.
Yes, absolutely. And you are doing this now with the John Wooden course, an extension of Coach. How can people get involved in what you're doing and advance some of this great work?
Well, we have, I've been trying to answer that question for 20 plus years. I think we're a pretty well kept secret, unfortunately. And well, maybe fortunately, I think you kind of never, I'm a firm believer in divine providence. And I think God gets you ready to do things when the time is right. And we've been working at it for a long time. Coach Wooden coached 16 or 17 years before he won his first championship. And I sort of feel like we're on the same track. It's been a long time for us to try to get ready to make this as important as it needs to be, I think, and the time has never been more right for it. So, I mean, we've tried to build a very high quality website. If you go to the johnrwoodencourse.com, we just finished a book that we think hopefully and you believe would be very valuable for people to read. The exercise in the book, Pooja, to do the individual success assessment, I believe is an eye-opening exercise for anybody who really wants to improve themselves. Evaluate your own behavior on John Wooden's Pyramid of Success, and it will really open your eyes and your heart to the possibilities of other things that you can accomplish. And like I say, we're doing webinars, and we're going to begin to offer some virtual training and coaching. We have four distinct courses that we teach. And we also have a number of tools that people can buy, posters. We have a very powerful app around the individual success assessment that literally puts 25 years of information and the power of the pyramid of success right in your hands.
Wow.
And you can avail yourself of that looking at our website, thejohnrwoodencourse.com.
Fantastic. Lynn, it is a great pleasure, an honor to speak with you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, but I really enjoyed it.
For more on how to find calm and freedom in a fast-paced world, hit the subscribe button below. And please share this wisdom with someone you love.